On an October afternoon, Lakeview Cemetery in northern Seattle was bathed in the pale gold of sunset. Maple leaves, now turned vibrant shades of red and orange, carpeted the ground, while a chilly breeze whispered through the rows of aging tombstones. Graham Westfield, dressed in a charcoal suit and a deep gray overcoat, stepped out of a black Bentley parked near the cemetery gate. He was one of the most powerful tech CEOs in America, wealthy, composed, and always in control of his life. Except today. It had been 5 years since Clara Monroe, the only woman he had ever truly loved, died in a sudden accident. Every year on this date, he returned here, not with flowers, not with company, only with the ache that never seemed to fade. As he approached the familiar grave under a towering maple tree, his steps faltered. A small boy was curled up beside the headstone marked Clara Monroe. He looked to be about 6 or 7 years old, thin under a worn-out coat that barely kept him warm. His brown hair was a tangled mess, his skin pale from the cold, and his eyes, when they looked up at Graham, made him freeze in place. They were her eyes. Graham frowned. "Hey, kid, are you lost?" he asked, voice low but steady, tinged with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. The boy stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I came to see my mom." Graham felt his chest tighten. "Your mom?" he repeated, bending down slightly, eyes narrowing. The boy pointed directly at the headstone. "Clara Monroe, 1985 to 2018. Her," he said. "She used to visit me before she went away." The air suddenly turned still. The wind swept past, stirring golden leaves around Graham's feet, but inside him, a storm was rising. Clara had never told him she had a child. They had loved each other for nearly 6 years, been married for 3, and divorced a year before she passed. All that time, enough for Graham to believe he had known her to the core. He knew every tiny mole on her left shoulder, the faint scar on her right wrist she never explained. He remembered the scent of her Earl Grey tea on winter afternoons, the books she read again and again, To the Lighthouse, Norwegian Wood, The Goldfinch. He remembered the unfinished dreams they'd whispered to each other in the dark. A wood cabin by Lake Chelan, a cozy bookshop, and a golden retriever named Maple. And yet, in all those years, not once had she ever mentioned a child. No hint, no name, not a single memory to suggest it. Graham slowly crouched down. The cold wind cut through the thick layers of his coat, but his hands didn't tremble. His eyes didn't leave the boy sitting in front of Clara's grave. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice now hoarse. The boy looked up. His hazel eyes were calm, deep, unnervingly quiet. "Liam," he said. Graham heard the name echo in his mind, a strange note in a room he thought he knew by heart. Liam. That name had never come up in any conversation he ever had with Clara. Not in letters, not in dreams, not even once. And yet the boy's face, those eyes, they were hers. There was no denying it. The way he sat there in silence as if that stone marker was the most familiar place in the world. Graham felt the ground tilt beneath him. His thoughts reeled. His heartbeat stumbled. "Where do you live, Liam?" he asked, his voice dropping lower, pulled down by the weight of rising chaos. "Rainier House," Liam replied softly. "It's a shelter. Miss Joan takes care of us." A shelter. Graham clenched his fists. His knuckles turned white, bones pressing sharply against his skin. Clara left a child in an orphanage. The woman who once cried because he missed a dinner. The woman who said, "I can't stand the thought of anyone feeling abandoned." And yet. Then Liam said the next words. Words that knocked the air right out of Graham's lungs. "Miss Joan told me. My mommy used to visit me, but she had to leave. She went to heaven." Just one sentence, soft as the wind brushing over blades of grass. But it tore apart everything Graham thought he knew to be true. In that moment, he understood everything, or rather he realized he understood nothing at all. There was a part of Clara, a chapter of her life, hidden so deeply, that even though he had loved her with all he had, he'd never touched that memory, never been allowed to share it, never even been told. And yet Liam was here, in flesh and blood, with a face etched with familiar softness, with eyes that had once made Graham fall recklessly in love, with a voice that carried the quiet ache of a child left behind, but still had the faith to whisper, "My mommy used to visit me." Graham looked at the boy, his chest tightening as though a boulder had been placed upon it, and in that moment, the only thing he knew, amidst the shock, the unraveling memories, the hundreds of unanswered questions, was this: he couldn't walk away. Graham remained beside the boy, knees pressed to the cold ground, hand resting lightly on the time-worn grave marker. The Seattle air bit at his skin, carving thin lines of cold across his face, but the sharpest pain was just beneath his ribs, where his heart began to tremble, as if ready to shatter. Liam, the name echoed in his mind, knocking gently, persistently, on the doors of memory. If what the boy said was true, if Clara was his mother, then that meant, during all those years of love, marriage, and the tears of goodbye, she had hidden a truth so immense it staggered belief. A child. Graham turned his head, forcing his voice low, pushing down the chaos screaming in his mind. "Who told you Clara was your mom?" The question slipped out slowly, each word heavy, as though he were speaking not to the boy, but to Clara herself. Liam lowered his head, his small shoulders curling either from the cold or the weight of a faint memory. His fingers twirled a dried maple leaf, fragile like the fading memory of autumn past. "Miss Joan," he said. "She said, my mummy left me here when I was a baby, but she came to visit, not often, but she did." Graham bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood. He had to hold back, not to tremble, not to cry, not to scream the question burning in his chest. "Why? Why did you keep this from me, Clara?" But instead he asked, quiet, slow, guarded, until. Liam lifted his eyes, gazing toward the gravestone, with a look so hauntingly familiar it echoed the way Clara once looked during those long silences between them, as they both stared at a sunset they no longer spoke about. Until she stopped. Miss Joan said she went to heaven. His voice didn't break into tears, but it cracked in the wind like a second farewell. Graham clenched the hand resting on his knee, fingernails digging into his palm. A part of him wanted to be angry, for being lied to, for being shut out, for being denied the most sacred thing between two people who once loved each other. But another part was sinking into the numb, frozen ache of loss. "Clara, you once told me you weren't good at lying. You said, what I fear most is keeping secrets from you. So why? Why this?" He looked at Liam again, not as a man hunting for the truth, but as someone lost in the dark, desperately trying to reassemble the pieces of someone already gone. Those hazel eyes, gentle, deep, and still as a winter lake. That small nose, straight, exactly like Clara's childhood photos she once shared. The lips, slightly pursed when nervous, a habit Clara had when lost in thought. He was a mirror of the woman Graham had once loved so completely that it felt impossible to ever love again. Graham bent lower, his face nearly level with Liam's. He no longer felt the cold. He no longer felt the ache in his hands. He only felt something collapsing inside, a silent implosion, like a cabin caving in after years of being hollowed out. If this was Clara's child, if this was the piece of her she'd never dared to give, then he couldn't lose it again. Graham suddenly felt like he was staring into a mirror, not to see himself, but to see the woman he once loved reflected in the form of a child he never knew existed. He stood, voice firm, as if commanding himself. "We're going. Now." Liam looked up, hesitant. "To where?" Graham extended his hand. "Somewhere warm. You shouldn't be here. Not like this." For a moment Liam hesitated, as if waiting for a different question, a contradiction, or a step away. But Graham's gaze didn't waver. It didn't retreat. It didn't flinch. And then Liam placed his small hand into Graham's, hesitantly, gently, as though he was used to rejection. The hand was ice-cold, fragile, fingers thin as late winter branches. A hand is far too small to carry this much loneliness. But to Graham, it felt like a single note breaking through the sealed symphony of his life. Solitary, delicate, but echoing without end. He closed his hand around Liam's, without a word. The car pulled up in front of an old red brick building, hazy through the Seattle twilight. Tall windows streaked with moss. A weathered wooden sign hung from the iron gate. Rainier House for Children in Need. It wasn't hell, but it had never been home either. Graham stepped out of the car. Liam followed, still holding tight to his hand. The boy didn't ask. He didn't even look back, as if he was already too used to following someone, only to be left behind. Inside, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the musty scent of old wood, creating a heavy, stale air, like memories left to gather dust. A middle-aged woman sitting behind the reception desk looked up, offering a soft smile when she saw Liam. "Back already, sweetheart." Then her gaze shifted to Graham. Gray suit, expensive tie, cashmere coat, still carrying the chill of the evening mist. This man didn't belong here. Her eyes immediately grew wary. Graham reached into his coat and pulled out a silver-embossed business card, holding it out to her. "I'm Graham Westfield," he said evenly. "I need to speak with Miss Joan." A few minutes later, the wooden door at the end of the hallway swung open. A small, white-haired woman stepped through, sharp-eyed, steady, not the look of someone frail, but of someone who had lived a long time with secrets. "Mr. Westfield." She spoke first, as if she had been expecting him for a very long time. Graham stopped short, unable to hide his surprise. "You know who I am?" Joan nodded, unflinching. "Clara told me. She made me promise not to contact you, ever." The words dropped like a heavy stone into Graham's already flooded soul. He felt the sting of betrayal for the second time. "Why?" he asked, voice thick. "Why would she do that?" Joan didn't waver. "Because she loved you," she said simply. "But she had a past she couldn't erase. When she met you, she'd already made the hardest decision of her life, giving up Liam so he could have a better chance." Graham turned his head away. Liam was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, his back pressed against the wall, legs drawn up, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, missing one eye. He seemed to sink deeper into silence, as if he had long since accepted that he wasn't allowed to speak, wasn't allowed to ask, wasn't allowed to choose. Graham felt his heart twist, not out of anger at Clara anymore, but out of something else, out of sorrow, a sorrow so sharp it physically hurt. "She wanted to tell you," Joan continued, voice softer now, but by the time she found the courage, she was gone. Graham stood there, motionless, like a man who had just unlocked the door to a house he thought he knew, only to realize he had never once stepped into its most important room. "And now what?" he asked, turning back to Joan, his voice low, struggling to hold back the knot rising in his throat. "What happens to him?" Joan met his gaze, firm, honest, without pressure or pity. "That depends on you, Mr. Westfield. Liam has no family, no legal guardian. He's been here since he was a baby. If you walk away, nothing changes. But if you choose to stay, he might have a future." Graham drove slower than usual. The city beyond the windshield was lighting up for the night. Seattle faded into mist, just like the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Shapeless, undefined, no one spoke. Liam sat quietly in the seat beside him, clutching a small, battered pillow against his chest, like the last fragile shield protecting his inner world. His eyes stared out the window, not blinking, not searching. But Graham knew, from the moment the boy had placed his hand into his. Something had been decided, not by logic, by the heart. Graham drove on in silence. His mind spun with hundreds of questions, none with answers. It wasn't about business anymore. It wasn't about investments or strategies. This was life. This was a child the world had forgotten. And now, Graham wasn't sure he had the right to fix it. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't take Liam back there, not even for one more night. The high-rise in Capitol Hill loomed out of the Seattle mist like a frozen monolith. Graham's penthouse was at the very top, a place he had lived for 6 years. 6 years with no one entering his heart. 6 years where it served both as a fortress and a prison. When the elevator doors opened, Liam stepped in hesitantly, as if he were stepping into an entirely different world. The apartment was so silent that Liam's footsteps echoed against the polished walnut floors. White walls, massive glass windows, smoky gray Italian leather sofas. Every line is pristine, impeccable, a place with no room for a child. Graham slipped off his coat, draping it over the back of a chair, glancing at Liam. The boy stood frozen, as if even breathing might shatter something. His small hands gripped the frayed strap of his backpack, like it was the only thing he had left that belonged to him. "Come in," Graham said, voice low, not commanding, but not exactly gentle either. Liam stepped forward cautiously, so light on his feet it seemed like the floor might swallow him whole. His eyes swept the room, not with wonder, not with excitement, but with cautious calculation. Graham watched, and suddenly realized, in this enormous gleaming space, there was no sign anyone had ever truly lived here, except him. No photographs, no children's fingerprints smudged on the glass, no extra cups in the kitchen, just crystal, no missing puzzle piece that would ever fit Liam. He had never thought of sharing this space, let alone sharing his existence. "Are you hungry?" Graham asked, voice deep, opening the fridge. Liam nodded slightly. "A little." Graham peered inside. Burgundy wine, Italian sauces, aged cheese, Japanese scallops, truffle butter. Everything was food meant for an adult, a man who lived alone, who never had to ask what someone else might want to eat. A long silence passed. Then finally, he pulled out a few slices of bread, a slab of unsalted butter, and a block of sharp cheddar. "How about grilled cheese?" he asked, not entirely sure if he was doing anything right. Liam smiled softly, just a hint, as if afraid that showing hope might make it vanish. "That sounds good." The sizzle of butter hitting the hot pan echoed like Graham's heart is slowly returning to the present. He flipped each slice with care. The kitchen began to warm. The scent of browning butter drifted through the space, carrying with it an unfamiliar warmth in a place that had always felt as cold as marble. For the first time in a very long while, a meal wasn't just about surviving. It was about being. After dinner, Liam got up, not asking permission, not being stopped. He wandered quietly around the living room, fingertips brushing the edge of the table, the corner of a bookshelf, and the surface of unfamiliar objects, as if silently asking, "Are you real?" Graham said nothing. He just watched. Liam stopped in front of the fireplace, the only spot in the apartment where a framed photo existed. He stared at it for a long time. It was Clara, hair pulled into a loose bun, a wistful smile. The photo was taken at an art exhibit 5 years ago, back when Graham still held her hand in public, unafraid of who might see. Liam didn't speak. He just looked, for a long time, as if in that photo he'd found something familiar, vague but buried deep. Graham stepped up behind him, keeping some distance. He didn't know what to say, didn't know if Liam wanted to hear anything, but in that moment, between the cold fireplace, the photo of someone no longer alive, and an apartment that had never been a home, he knew that this boy was no longer a stranger. Graham stepped closer. Yeah, she was. Liam looked up at him. "Did you love her?" The question struck like a needle straight through his chest. Graham nodded slowly. "More than anything." Liam whispered again. "Miss Jones said she loved me too, but she couldn't keep me." That sentence, so simple, so childlike, cut sharper than anything. It felt like hearing Clara sigh in the middle of the night, trying to speak but never able to say the words. That night, after Liam went to bed, Graham sat alone in his study. Stock analysis charts glowed on his laptop screen, but he couldn't read a single number. The apartment had gone quiet again. The fireplace remained unlit. Even the soft amber lights couldn't soften the howling inside his mind. Liam was asleep, curled up on the long sofa, clinging to a pillow, breathing steadily, as if this place had always been safe. But Graham couldn't close his eyes. He sat at the bar counter, white-knuckling a glass of water. The polished surface reflected his face, eyes cold, lost, and full of storms. His thoughts were trapped in Liam's eyes, Clara's eyes, that same warm hazel, that same depth that left you breathless. But now those eyes held a presence he had never known. A child he'd never touched, a life he'd never been invited into. And then the questions rose, unspoken, but pulsing through every vein. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me spend 5 years aching for you, while you still lived within the eyes of that boy? Graham leaned forward, elbows on the counter, forehead resting in his palms. The pain wasn't physical. It came from the realization that he had believed he knew Clara completely, but in truth, he had only known the parts she allowed him to see. The most sacred part of her, she had taken to the grave. He stood abruptly, almost without thinking, moved toward the window ledge, where Seattle shimmered in the city lights, while his heart sank into something darker than night. Then he pulled out his phone. hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. Daniel Rios, the one person Graham had ever trusted with his private life. The only one who knew that Graham's past wasn't built solely on success, but on loss. He pressed the call. The line hadn't rung more than twice when the other end picked up. Rios. Graham swallowed hard, his voice low and sharp, like folded steel. I need everything about Liam, his birth records, his biological father, anything Clara left behind. A pause, then Daniel's voice, firm, steady. Understood. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Graham hung up, and he stood there, unmoving. The night outside remained unchanged, but inside him, something had collapsed. Not trust, but the illusion that his grief had ended the day Clara died. Because now, he realized, the real grief had only just begun. The next morning, Graham stepped out of his room and saw Liam standing at the large window, gazing out at the Seattle skyline, shrouded in the mist of early dawn. He was still wrapped in the same blanket from the night before, standing still like a small shadow. I didn't know if I should wake you, Liam said softly. You're fine, Graham replied. Want breakfast? Liam nodded quietly. They ate eggs and toast together, not saying much, but for the first time Graham noticed Liam was looking at him longer, with more trust, more expectation. After breakfast, while Graham was clearing the dishes, Liam stood by the window, fingers tightly gripping the edge of the curtain. Are you going to send me back? He asked. Graham turned. Do you want to go back? Liam shook his head immediately. No, but there's nothing there. Silence settled between them. Graham set the bowl down and sat beside him. He looked into the boy's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't just see Clara. He saw himself, a child once abandoned by his father, who had taught himself how not to need anyone. No one's sending you anywhere, Graham said firmly. Not if you don't want to go. Liam didn't reply, but his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time, he stepped closer and leaned gently against Graham's side. Graham froze. He didn't know what to do, except to place a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeeze, just slightly. In that moment, there were no millions, no contracts, no CEO title, just a man and a boy, two souls left behind, finding each other in a cold city. Seattle was cold and windy that night. The penthouse atop Capitol Hill glowed with light, but Graham Westfield sat in silence, surrounded by shadows. On the table in front of him was a thick brown envelope, sealed with the stamp of his private investigation team. 3 days had passed since he called Daniel Rios, the only investigator he trusted with everything Clara had left behind. I need everything: birth records, medical files, adoption papers, anything Clara ever kept or hid. Now the envelope sat like a mountain of truth, waiting to collapse the entire foundation of what Graham once believed was real. It was raining outside, but he didn't notice, only his hands, trembling slightly as he pulled out the documents, one by one. Birth certificate, father's name, blank. The first line hit him like a punch. Name, Liam Monroe. Mother, Clara Monroe. Father, blank. Graham gripped the edge of the envelope. Not surprising, but still painful. A silent, freezing kind of pain, like being denied by someone already buried. She hadn't listed the father's name, not because she didn't know it, but because she had chosen not to leave a trace. His throat tightened. He had once thought, maybe Clara hid Liam out of fear, out of circumstance, out of desperation. But the moment his eyes met that blank space on an official document, He knew it was a choice. She had erased the man from Liam's life, from every record, from every truth. And that could only mean one thing. That man wasn't him. The next document, a DNA test application, blue ink, typed form, half a page of signatures, but it had never been processed. Pending, not submitted. Graham flipped quickly to the next page, hands trembling, not from fear, but because deep down he already knew his name wouldn't be there. And it wasn't. Under the section labeled Alleged Father, his eyes stopped. He read it once, then again, then stared, locked in place. Alleged Father. Mark Donovan Graham felt his heart clench, not from the name itself, but from what it meant. Mark Donovan, a powerful investor, a man who treated companies like pawns in a chess game. Someone Graham once invited into a 2017 project, only to reject him after realizing, I don't trust anyone who profits off the blood of others. A man Graham had always considered a toxin in the financial world, and now his name was in Clara's son's file. Graham braced against the desk, his body leaning forward as if without support he might collapse. He closed his eyes, but images surged in any way. Clara sitting by the window, her gaze fading whenever she spoke of a very bad time. Clara once argued with him when he said, everyone deserves to know the truth, and her replying, some truths aren't worth destroying what we have. Now he understood. Now he knew she had chosen silence, because if she had told him, everything would have fallen apart. Graham sat down again, placing the documents back on the table. His body sank into the chair, as if he had just returned from war. But the real war, the one inside him, was just beginning. Clara had loved him. He believed that. But she had also feared him, feared what he would do if he found out about Liam, feared that he could never love a child born from the bloodline of a man he despised. Graham lifted his head, eyes drifting through the glass. The city of Seattle was still lit, but inside him, everything had just gone dark. Mark Donovan, a cold-blooded billionaire investor, chairman of Eagle Venture Capital, the man who once tried to take over Graham's company 3 years ago, and the most dangerous rival he'd ever faced in the financial world. God, Graham whispered. He shot up from his chair and walked to the window, staring down at the mist-veiled city below. If Mark Donovan was Liam's biological father, what would happen? A man like Mark never did anything without purpose. If he found out Liam existed, and that Liam was his son, he wouldn't stay quiet. Graham shut his eyes, forcing himself to picture it. Mark Donovan showing up, knocking on the door, demanding custody, turning Liam into a pawn in a ruthless power game. Number not happening. Graham turned back to the desk and called Daniel. Daniel, I want a paternity test. Quiet. No leaks. No legal trail. Daniel hesitated. You think Donovan is... I need to know, before he does. Out in the hallway, Liam stood behind the wall, gripping a comic book tightly. He'd caught a few words. Donovan. Test. Father. His face turned to stone. That night, when Graham came out of his office, Liam was sitting on the couch, staring at the black TV screen. Liam, Graham said softly. Everything okay? The boy looked up, voice small, but sharp as glass. Is Mark Donovan my dad? The question hit Graham like a punch to the chest. Where did you hear that? He asked. I heard you, Liam said, his eyes locked on Graham's. You said test. You said Donovan. Silence. Liam stood up suddenly. Is it true? Graham nodded slowly. I'm trying to find out. Why, so you can give me to him? Liam's voice cracked, eyes reddening. He's rich, right? More powerful than you. Maybe he wants me now. Liam, stop. That's not. Why do you care? You didn't even know me 2 weeks ago. Because now I do, Graham shouted, and that changes everything. Liam's breath hitched. If he's my real dad, then why didn't he come? Why didn't he find me? Why did my mom die without telling anyone? Because she was scared. Graham exhaled, choking on the words. Of him, of what he'd do. She was trying to protect you. Liam bit his lip and turned away, trembling, with anger, with sadness, with the weight of a world where grown-ups made all the choices. Graham stepped forward and knelt in front of him. I don't know what kind of father he'd be, Liam, but I know this. I'm not giving you to anyone. Not now, not ever, unless you choose it. Liam stared at him, lips pressed tight. 1 second. 2. Then he collapsed into Graham's chest, bursting into sobs. That night, after Liam had fallen asleep on the couch, Graham sat beside him, eyes never leaving the boy's face. Donovan may have the blood, he thought, but this boy, he's already family. His phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Test result ready. Want me to send it? Graham looked at the screen, then turned the phone off. Whatever the result, he wasn't backing away. 3 days later. Seattle was cloaked in an early winter drizzle, thin and sharp like needles, coating the narrow streets beneath the 47th floor office window. In Graham's hand was a steaming cup of black coffee, strong and bitter, the only thing keeping him functional after days of sleeplessness. He had just sat back in his leather chair when Rebecca burst through the door as if pushed by something unseen, usually calm, collected. Today her eyes were wide with alarm. "Sir," she panted, frozen in the doorway. "There's someone downstairs. He says it's urgent." Graham set the coffee down. His instincts dropped like a stone. His heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked, voice even. Rebecca swallowed hard. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Mark Donovan." The room went dead silent. No more rain tapping against the glass. No distant hum of the printer. Just a few drops of black coffee, slipping off the rim of the cup, landing on the crisp white cuff of Graham's sleeve. Hot. But he didn't feel a thing. Graham stood up slowly, deliberately, like any sudden move might spark a war. "Where is he?" "Lobby," Rebecca replied. "He's waiting." Graham gave a slight nod, saying nothing more. He buttoned his suit jacket and adjusted his sleeves, not for formality, but to hide the tremor swelling beneath his chest. He walked out of his office, leaving behind the last trace of calm before the storm truly hit. The elevator descended 1 floor at a time. The digital numbers ticked down slowly. 46, 45, 44. Graham stood still inside the glass capsule, halogen lights casting cold blades of reflection across his eyes. He had prepared for this moment. He just didn't think it would come so soon. The elevator doors slid open, and instantly Graham's eyes met the man standing in the middle of the lobby, as if he owned the entire building. Mark Donovan. No introduction, no entourage. Just a charcoal gray bespoke suit, tailored so precisely it hugged every line without a crease. A black silk tie, flawless, wrinkle-free. Salt and pepper hair slicked back, every strand seemingly placed with intention. But what kept everyone at a distance wasn't the way he looked. It was his presence, calm, cold, still as a lake surface, yet beneath it, a knife always ready to surface. A wolf freshly awakened, and fully aware his territory had been breached. Mark turned just as Graham stepped out of the elevator. His steely gray eyes swept over Graham in a flash, enough to read him, size him up, and seize the upper hand. A subtle curve at the corner of his lips. Not a smile, not friendliness, no threat, just a silent declaration. I know. Graham Westfield. His voice was quiet, measured, not meant to draw attention, yet enough to still every sound around them. We need to talk. Graham walked straight toward him, eyes locked. No handshake, no nod. Inside him burned a low, simmering fury, not from fear, but because this man might take away the one thing Graham had only just realized he couldn't live without. Liam. 38th floor. Glass conference room. Cold gray stone floors. Harsh white light spilled unevenly across the rain-streaked windows. No flowers, no assistants, no water glasses, just two men facing each other across a long black glass table, and a wall of tension so thick it felt like a second pane of glass no one could see through. Let me guess. Graham spoke first. His voice was low and sharp, like a blade freshly honed on pain. You found out. Mark leaned back in his chair. His gray eyes didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't deny. I have resources, Graham. You know that. No explanation, no arrogance, just fact. Like uncovering secrets was something he did with his morning espresso and a quick call to kill a deal. Graham clenched his hands under the table. Not from fear, but to hold back a sigh he refused to show, especially in front of a wolf who could smell blood. What do you want? He asked. Each word dropped like a weight on glass. Mark placed his hands on the table. A simple movement, but it made the entire room feel smaller. Simple, he said, eyes never leaving Graham's. I want to meet my son. Silence. Not the polite pause of negotiation, but the kind of silence that hangs after a word you can't take back. Graham leaned into his chair, eyes staring but unfocused. The ceiling light reflected against the sharp lines of his cheekbone. He doesn't know you, Graham said. He doesn't trust you. Hell, he barely even trusts me. Mark didn't argue. He nodded slightly, acknowledging, carrying the weight of lost years. I don't blame him, but that's exactly why I have to be part of his life. I never had the chance. Graham leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You had the chance, Mark. You just didn't know it. And maybe Clara didn't tell you for a reason. The words landed like glass, shattering in slow motion, sharp, clean, final. For the first time in his power-hardened life, Mark paused. The eyes that had made CEOs flinch lost a layer of glass. And in that split second, very brief, something fragile flickered, regret and grief. She kept him from me, Mark said softly, almost in a whisper. And now, I want to make it right. Graham stared at him. For a long time. No anger, no pity, just a man, trying to read a chessboard where every move could pull Clara's son into a storm neither of them could undo. Graham rose to his feet, both hands pressed against the edge of the table, staring straight at his former rival, now the biological father of the child he was protecting. Mark, this isn't a business acquisition. This isn't a takeover. Liam is not a merger you can negotiate. I didn't come to win, Mark replied. I came to be a father. Then act like it, Graham snapped. Let him choose. No pressure, no court orders, no power plays. Mark gave a cold smile. You don't trust me, Graham nodded. Number, I know you. Mark reached into his coat and placed a folded letter on the table. I wrote this, the night I found out. Let him read it. If he doesn't want to meet me, I'll leave, for now. Graham glanced at the letter, then nodded slowly. You'll get your answer, but if you try to force anything... I won't, Mark cut in. But I don't quit easily, Graham. You know that too. That evening, Graham handed Liam the letter after dinner. The boy sat on the couch, wrapped in warm lamplight, holding the envelope as if it weighed more than the world. "It's from him," Graham said gently. "You don't have to read it. You don't have to respond." Liam looked up at him. "Will you be mad if I want to know him?" The question pierced like a small, sharp knife. Graham hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I'll just, be here, no matter what you decide." Liam nodded. He opened the letter, and the look in his eyes when he finished. No one else could read. But Graham knew one thing for sure. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Azure View, a fine dining restaurant perched on Queen Anne Hill, Seattle. The sky outside. Liam didn't answer, but his tense gaze said everything. "I'm about to step into a stranger's world, and I need to know someone real is still out here." Mark Donovan was already seated. For all his power, his dominance in the world of finance, the moment Liam walked in, he couldn't stand up right away. Because Mark had read about guilt, he'd scoffed at regret, but he had never come face to face with them until now. Liam stood before him, thin, tense, and uncannily like Clara. Mark took a breath, then rose from his seat. "Hi, I'm Mark." Liam gave a small nod. A 7-year-old boy, facing the most powerful man on the West Coast. And in his eyes, there was no fear, only cold wariness. "You're my dad?" Liam asked, voice even, like delivering a verdict. Mark faltered. "Yes, I am. Why didn't you come sooner?" "I didn't know," Mark answered honestly. "I didn't even know you existed. But you knew about Mom, right?" "Yes." "And you still didn't come." Mark slowly set his fork down and exhaled, his eyes darkening. "Your mom and I, we were young, reckless. We weren't from the same world. When she disappeared, I thought she chose to." Liam clenched his small fists, voice trembling. "She didn't disappear. She broke. She worked day and night and cried herself to sleep. I heard her, even when I was just a baby. She gave me away," he continued, "but she came back. She visited. She left things in my blanket. She whispered my name when she thought I was asleep. She was scared and tired, but she tried." The room fell still. Mark looked at the boy, and it was as if Liam had pierced straight through the armor he'd worn for 2 decades. A waiter brought the appetizer, soup in a delicate porcelain bowl, but neither of them touched it. Liam stared at his hands, then asked, "If I wasn't your son, would you still want to meet me?" Mark froze. "If I was just some kid who showed up at your door." It wasn't a challenge. It was a wound, waiting to see if someone dared to touch it. Mark swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to say yes, but I can't lie to you. The truth is, finding out about you shook everything I believed mattered, and now, nothing else feels important." Before leaving the table, Mark pulled out an envelope. "I wrote this before tonight, when I still didn't know who you were. It's not fancy, just honest." Liam took it, didn't open it. He stood up. "I don't know what I want yet." "That's okay," Mark nodded, offering a faint smile. Not the smile of a businessman, but the uncertain one of a man who'd just lost the map to his own life. "But I know one thing," Liam said, eyes locked on his. "I don't trust people who leave." Liam turned and walked out. Graham Westfield was waiting by the car, hands in his coat pockets, gaze steady but worried. Liam said nothing as he approached. He stopped in front of Graham for just a second, then wrapped his arms around him. No tears, no words, but it was enough. Enough for Graham to understand. I saw everything, and I still chose to come back. 1 week after the meeting at the Azure View, Seattle was swept by sudden cold rains, but inside the Capitol Hill penthouse, the storm wasn't outside. It sat on the kitchen counter in the form of a legal notice. Graham held the document, reading it over and over. Petition for emergency custody review, filed by Mr. Mark Donovan, asserting parental rights over minor Liam Monroe. His grip tightened. The same hands that once steered a billion-dollar empire now trembled with helplessness. Seattle, Monday morning, gray skies. On the marble kitchen counter of Graham Westfield's penthouse sat a plain white envelope. No logo, no return address, just a name typed cleanly at the center. To Mr. Graham Westfield. He pulled out the document inside. A faint hiss as paper slid free from the envelope. Graham's eyes hardened the moment he read the first line. Emergency petition for legal custody, filed by Mark Donovan, legal biological father of minor Liam Monroe. He sat down, stunned, the words blurring under the soft ceiling light. His heart slowed, not from fear of Mark Donovan, but from the deeper fear that Liam might once again be torn apart. Liam Monroe, age 7, was in the living room, halfway through a drawing with colored pencils Rebecca had bought the day before. He looked up, and though Graham hadn't said a word, the boy already knew. "Is he taking me?" Liam asked quietly. Graham paused. "He's trying." Liam nodded. He didn't cry. He just looked down at the drawing, where 3 figures stood side by side, one tall man in a suit, one woman with long hair, and a small child. Graham swallowed. "You okay?" "No," Liam whispered, "but I'm used to it." Graham sat across from Susan Keller, one of the most experienced family attorneys in Seattle. On the table, Liam's birth certificate, Daniel's investigation files, Mark's emergency petition. "Legally," Susan began, "Mark Donovan has the advantage, Graham. His bloodline carries weight. He has no criminal." Graham wore a crisp white shirt and charcoal gray suit, standing beside Susan. Across the aisle, Mark Donovan, composed as ever, flanked by 3 immaculately dressed attorneys. The judge, a middle-aged black man, watched them with a firm, unreadable gaze. "Judge, Mr. Donovan, you filed for emergency custody as the biological father. On what grounds?" Mark, clear and direct. "I wasn't informed of my son's existence until recently. Had I known, I would never have let him grow up in foster care. I want Liam to come home, where he'll be raised by his family." Susan turned toward Graham. "Mr. Westfield, you have no biological connection, no adoption papers. Why do you believe you should have custody?" Graham stepped forward. His eyes never left the judge. "Because I was there when no one else was. I didn't wait for DNA results to care. I didn't need a court order to open my door. I've been with Liam through nightmares, through skipped meals, through nights he thought he was unlovable. I'm not asking to be called Dad. I'm asking to stay where I've always been, by his side." Mark's attorney, "With all due respect, Mr. Westfield is a wealthy man who may have grown emotionally attached out of guilt. But my client is not an absentee father by choice. He was kept in the dark. Now that he knows the truth, he intends to be in his son's life. He won't let a stranger decide what's best for him." After 90 tense minutes, the judge finally spoke. "The court cannot make a final ruling based on sentiment. However, due to the sensitivity of this case, I'm ordering a formal hearing in 10 days. where Liam Monroe may speak if he chooses. Silence filled the courtroom. Susan gently placed her hand on Graham's shoulder. This changes everything. He'll have to choose. That evening, the penthouse was quiet. Liam sat on the window seat, hugging a pillow, gazing out at the strips of Seattle's night lights. Graham walked over and sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long while. "Do I have to speak?" Liam asked, his voice hoarse. "Only if you want to," Graham answered. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "There's no wrong thing when you speak from the heart." Liam nodded gently. "Will you be there?" "Always." And in the soft light cast through the window pane, Graham reached out and gently held Liam's small, trembling hand. A great battle was coming, but tonight, just a man, a child, and an unspoken love waiting together, in a place where light didn't need blood to define family. King County Family Court, Seattle, a cold, early winter morning. The courthouse hallway was awash in muted gray. Faint yellow lights glowed overhead, falling gently over the patterned tile floor. No loud voices, only soft footsteps and the wind brushing against the window panes. Graham Westfield stood beside Susan Keller, silent. He wore a navy suit, a spotless white shirt, and a silver-gray tie. His eyes were fixed on the window where Liam sat with the court's child psychologist. Liam wore a white button-up shirt, layered under a light brown sweater. In his pocket, he clutched a folded letter, a note from Clara, found just days ago in a box of old keepsakes. He had only read it the night before. Mark Donovan sat on the other side, still confident, but with something quieter in his expression. He had not come with 3 lawyers this time, just Garrett Hale, as if to say, "This is a matter of fatherhood, not business." Judge Malcolm Gray, the same judge from the previous hearing, entered the courtroom. "We are here today to determine legal guardianship of the minor, Liam Monroe. Per special request, the court will allow the child to speak, should he wish. Liam, would you like to say something?" The room fell utterly silent. Liam looked up, at Graham, then at Mark. He walked up to the witness stand. His legs trembled slightly, but his eyes, they were bright and clear. "Your Honor," he began, voice small but steady. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm only 7. I'm not good at choosing sides, but I know what it feels like to be left behind. And I know what it feels like to be heard." Mark leaned forward, tension tightening in his face. Graham gripped his hands together, holding himself steady. "Mr. Donovan is my biological father. That's what the truth says. But he wasn't there when my mom cried herself to sleep. He wasn't there when my stomach hurt all night in the group home. He wasn't there when I thought I wasn't good enough for anyone to stay." He turned to Graham, but he was. "Graham Westfield isn't my biological dad, but he came, and he didn't leave." Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out Clara's letter. His voice shook. "My mom wrote this for me. She said she was scared that Mr. Donovan would never love me, scared that telling the truth would break her again. So she kept me a secret. She hoped someday I'd meet someone, not to be my father, just someone who wouldn't walk away." He folded the letter, looked up. "I don't want to live in a big house where I feel like a mistake money's trying to fix. I don't need someone to say they love me. I need someone who proves it every day. And he has." He turned toward Graham again. Graham swallowed hard, eyes reddening. "So if the court wants to know who I want to live with..." Liam took a deep breath. "I choose Mr. Graham. Total silence. Judge Gray looked down at the file before him. He nodded, softly, almost as if he had known all along, but needed to hear it in Liam's voice. The court recognizes the clear, consistent, and heartfelt testimony of minor Liam Monroe. Based on care records, emotional well-being, and personal preference, legal guardianship is hereby temporarily awarded to Mr. Graham Westfield. There were no cheers, no background music, just Liam running into Graham's arms and Graham pulling him in, no longer a cold, unreachable CEO, but a father. Mark didn't leave right away. He stood still for a moment, then stepped forward, facing Graham and Liam. I lost, but I deserved to. Take care of him, better than I ever could. He gave Liam a quiet nod, then turned to go. But just before stepping out of the courtroom, he looked back. Liam, I hope someday I earn the right to hear you call me Dad. Liam looked at him. He said nothing, but this time his eyes held no coldness, only forgiveness, waiting for a longer journey. That night, Graham and Liam sat together on the living room couch. Liam rested his head on Graham's lap, holding his mother's letter tightly in his arms. You think she knows? Liam asked softly. I do, Graham replied. I think she's proud of you. And of you? Graham gave a faint smile. I hope so. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft as a promise. 3 weeks after the hearing, Seattle had entered true winter. The trees along Capitol Hill were bare now, branches heavy with white. And Graham Westfield's penthouse, once cold and echoing, was now filled with new sounds. Laughter, the smell of hot chocolate, the soft pattern of small feet running across hardwood floors. Graham stepped out of his bedroom one Saturday morning, his hair still tousled, wearing a soft gray sweater. The kitchen lights were already on. Liam sat at the dining table, deep in concentration, assembling a Lego spaceship, a fluffy towel still draped around his neck. You're up early, Graham said, as he poured himself a coffee. I had a dream, Liam replied, not looking up. Good dream? Sorta. You and me, on a boat. Mom was there too. Graham paused for a moment. His heart tugged, but he smiled. Was she steering? Nope. She was laughing. The following week, Graham's schedule was slammed with meetings. His company's AI initiative had hit delays, and he was out of the house by 6 a.m., returning close to 9 p.m. Liam stayed home with a temporary sitter. That night, Liam said nothing. No dinner requests, no stories from school. Graham sat down beside him. Tough day? Nope. Then what's wrong? Liam set his pencil down, speaking barely above a whisper. You said we'd decorate the tree tonight. Graham froze. He had forgotten. I'm sorry, buddy. I am. It's okay, Liam said, turning his face away. I'm used to people breaking promises. The next morning, Graham walked into his office and stared at the wall-to-wall meetings on his calendar. He stepped into the boardroom, looked around at his executive team, and said, reschedule everything from 5 p.m. onward, indefinitely. Everyone looked up in shock. Why, sir? Graham smiled. Because I have something more important to build. A home. That evening, Graham and Liam decorated the Christmas tree together for the first time in their lives. Liam climbed up onto a chair, carefully placing red ornaments, while Graham fumbled with tangled string lights. You're bad at this, Liam laughed. That makes 2 of us. Just as they finished, the doorbell rang. Rebecca had come by to deliver a large envelope, a special courier, on the front, from M.D. Graham opened it. Inside was the drawing Liam had made during his first meeting with Mark. now professionally framed. Along with it, a short letter. I lost the legal battle, but I still want to win the right to be someone Liam can trust. No pressure, no expectations, just time. Mark. Graham folded the letter silently. That night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Graham quietly hung the framed picture in the hallway. The following week, Liam's school held a Bring Your Parent to School Day. He hesitated about attending. People will ask, if you're my real dad. Graham sat down, eyes never leaving him. And what will you say? Liam looked back at him. That you're real enough. The next morning, Graham wore a long coat and walked side by side with Liam into the schoolyard. When the teacher asked, "Who do we have here, Liam?" the boy answered clearly, confidently, "This is Graham. He's my dad." Graham dipped his head, lips tight, holding back a wave of emotion. December 24th. They stopped at Lakeview Cemetery, where Clara's grave lay beneath an old maple tree. Snow fell gently. The wind was soft. Graham and Liam stood side by side, bringing white flowers and a small gift, a framed photo of all three of them, Clara, Liam, and Graham. Liam placed the frame on the snowy ground and whispered, "Hi, Mom, I'm doing okay. Graham takes care of me, and sometimes I take care of him, too." He looked up. "I think you'd like him." Graham stood behind him, eyes red, but no tears. He rested a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Thank you for finding him," he said in his heart, "and thank you for still being here." Snow continued falling outside, frosting the tall windows of the penthouse. Inside, in the warm kitchen, golden light pooled across the walnut table, where Graham and Liam sat writing Christmas cards, a tradition the boy had never known. The scent of butter cookies filled the air, mingled with cinnamon and hot chocolate. Soft Christmas music played from the speakers. "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" hummed like a lullaby. Graham carefully wrote a card to Rebecca, to Susan Keller, then glanced sideways. Liam was writing one, too, to Mark Donovan. He didn't write much, just a few lines, but each word was slow, steady, as if he were writing it for himself. "Thank you for the picture. I got your letter. Maybe one day we can go sailing." He paused. Then he smiled, without anyone telling him to, without hesitation. He picked up the pen and added one last line, a simple sentence Graham would remember for the rest of his life. Liam Monroe Westfield, that last name, part Clara, part Graham, and entirely Liam. Graham unconsciously froze, his pen slipping quietly onto the table. He turned, eyes drawn to the name the boy had just written. Liam didn't notice. He was carefully outlining a pine branch in silver glitter pen. But in that moment, Graham's heart pounded so hard, it almost hurt. Not from surprise, but from pride. Because that boy, the one Graham first met trembling and freezing at a grave, beside the woman they both loved, had just chosen him. With his name. Graham said nothing. He simply reached out and gently placed a hand on Liam's head, brushing it softly. Liam looked up and smiled. "Too much glitter?" "Just enough," Graham replied, voice tight with emotion. Close to midnight, after Liam had fallen asleep, curled up beneath a dinosaur comforter, star-shaped nightlight casting gentle shadows on the ceiling. Graham sat at the kitchen table, still staring at the card. It didn't need to be framed. It didn't need to be displayed. He simply folded it and tucked it into Clara's old leather journal, right in the center, on a blank page. And for the first time in 5 years, Graham added one line in his handwriting. "Clara, I kept the promise. Liam Monroe Westfield." a name that didn't yet appear on legal records, but one that had already been etched into Graham's heart. No bloodline is required, no paperwork is needed, just a boy brave enough to believe, and a man brave enough to stay. Seattle, 3 years later. The city had changed, but in a high-rise apartment on Mercer Island, one thing remained: simple breakfasts with slightly burnt eggs, and the laughter of a now 10-year-old boy. Graham Westfield, now 45, still carried the air of elegance, but his face had softened, less guarded, less controlled. Liam Monroe Westfield was taller, his hair longer, eyes brighter. He sat on a kitchen stool, locked in a mock debate with his father. "That's a crime, Liam. It's a personal preference, Dad." Graham paused for half a beat. Even after all this time, those 2 words, Dad, still made his heart skip. After breakfast, Liam slung on his backpack, getting ready for school. On the fridge door hung an old drawing, 3 figures standing together. The picture Liam drew at 7. Now it had a new addition, a small figure standing farther back, labeled with an arrow. Mark, not scary anymore. Graham had seen it and never took it down. "He's been writing regularly, hasn't he?" Graham asked. "Every month, like clockwork. And you?" Liam nodded, slipping an envelope into his bag. Today's reply: "I told him about our camping trip and my math grade." Graham smiled. No more questions, no interference, just quiet support. Later that afternoon, a small cafe near Liam's school, not a luxury restaurant, no bodyguards. Mark Donovan, now grayer, sat alone by the window. In his hand was Liam's letter. On the corner of the table sat a modest craft-wrapped gift. No brand, no ribbon, just a mini camping gear set, the one Liam had once said he wanted. Mark hadn't called, hadn't scheduled anything. But at exactly 4:15, Liam walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder. He nodded hello and sat down, not shy, but not rushing either. "I read your last letter," Liam said, "about the dog you adopted." "Yeah, her name's Stella, loudest thing in the house." They both chuckled. Just a little. "Enough." Liam glanced at the box. "That for me?" "Only if you want it." He opened it. His eyes lit up, but his voice stayed level. "I don't need things, you know." "I know," Mark nodded. "That's why I gave time first." The next morning, Liam's school buzzed with holiday energy. He stood between Graham and Mark, a hand in each of theirs. No one asked which one was the real father. No labels, just one boy who had once been left behind, now standing between 2 men who both chose not to leave. And when the class photo was taken, Liam leaned his head on Graham's shoulder, but his eyes looked toward Mark, and he smiled. Liam's life had once been a string of unanswered questions. Why did Mom leave me? Why didn't Dad come? Who will stay? Now he didn't need the answers anymore, because he had written them himself, in his name, Liam Monroe Westfield. And today, as Mark gently held his hand at the edge of the schoolyard, Liam finally understood. Real love doesn't mean choosing one. Sometimes, real love is being chosen by both.